One of the most surprising things I learned from doing this program, Wine for the Confused, it was a confusing thing that I learned, is that I'd never realized how much the taste of wine changed. I mean, this stuff is alive. It is living and breathing. Now, I kind of knew that when they had it in barrels or in vats, it was slowly changing and getting better. But what I never realized was how much it changes once it's in the glass. For example, you can sometimes have a first taste of a wine like this, and it's got a bit hard and metallic, and you think, I don't think that's very good, and you kind of forget about it, or drink another bottle, the other bottle on the table. Well, what I've discovered is that this wine that I didn't really like at all at the start, after 10, 15 minutes, it's actually it's okay. It's okay now. Then another 15, 20 minutes later, it's actually rather good. And then it can be terrific for a time. And even more surprising still, at the end, when maybe it's been in the glass nearly an hour, it can start fading and not be as good as it had been 20 minutes before. I mean, I find that extraordinary, and apparently it's what really fascinates all the wine enthusiasts. It's all the changes, the absolute impossibility of pinning the subject down. That is what they find so exciting. So next time you've got a wine in your glass, don't do what I used to do, which is taste it, make a judgment, and kind of forget about it. Just pay attention to it the whole time that it's in the glass. Now, I want to give you one or two little tips which I really hope are going to save you money, because one of the problems my wife and I used to have, we felt like a glass of wine in the evening, but we only wanted a glass each. We didn't want to waste a whole bottle because we thought it would go off, or else we'd open the bottle and then out of guilt, practically, well, not entirely guilt, we might want to drink the whole thing when we didn't really want to. So this is about how to make sure that you can have a glass of wine and then make sure that the rest doesn't go off before you want to drink it again. And the first invaluable tool is known as a refrigerator. Now, because it drops the temperature of the wine, that stops the wine reacting with the air, and that stops it going off. Simple as that. So if you've got a bottle of white wine, you finish it, just stick the cork back in, because that contains the amount of air that can get at the wine, put it in the fridge, and then when you want a glass of white wine, pull it out. It'll be fine to drink for at least 2 days, maybe 3. After that, it'll still be drinkable, but I find it loses a bit of life, and sometimes gets a little bit sharp, loses some of the sort of sweet, not the sweeter, the deeper, more subtle taste in the wine. But it'll last long enough. Now, red wine's more tricky, because my experience is red wine goes off. If you have a bottle of red wine, you drink 2 or 3 glasses, you stick that in, you just put it there on the counter. By the time you get to it the next evening, it's probably not going to be very good, and it may have gone off completely. But first of all, you can use the fridge. If you don't have any device like I'm going to show you in a moment, just stick that in, put it in the fridge. When you want a glass of red wine, pull it out again, just let it sit there for about half an hour to warm up, and it's going to taste really good again for a day or 2. Just keep putting it back in the fridge when you don't need it, and give it half an hour to warm up to room temperature. But there's one device which I've discovered which is absolutely terrific, and it's this thing. It costs $10, and it's a way of sucking air out of the bottle. It comes with a little rubbery cork like that, and all you do is when you finish drinking, you put this into the bottle, and it goes in very easily. I'm not really having to push it all hard. And then, once you've got it in, you just fit that over the top like that, and then you start sucking the air out. And what happens is that after the first few up and downs, it gets harder work, because you suck the air out and you're creating a vacuum, so it's working. So you do this, I often do it as much as 20, even 25 times. The wine's rather good. And then you can just take it like that, put it on the counter. You don't need to put it in the fridge as well, because you've removed the air which would otherwise be reacting with the wine and causing it eventually to go off. You can come back to it tomorrow, and it's going to be delicious. In fact, I often find the next day it's even better than the day before, because it's just had a chance to breathe. So, there's a very simple way. $10 and a refrigerator. people who've seen this program have said to me, well, why did you only choose vineyards in the Santa Ynez Valley? I mean, what's wrong with the rest of California or the rest of America? Well, I'm afraid the answer, very simply, was money. The sort of budget that we had for this program was a lot less than you'd get for an NBC documentary hour. And one of the ways we were able to make it work financially was to cut down on travel and hotels. So in fact, the crew all stayed here free at my place. They didn't fly down from San Francisco, they drove. And then all we had to do in the morning was jump in the cars and go over the hill, 45 minutes over the hill with the wineries that we wanted to go to. So that way it was possible, by keeping it all very small and local, to get the program done. But we're just very lucky that there are so many great wineries, as I say, just over the hill in the Santa Ynez Valley. Oh, whiff. Can't smell much. God. I want to tell you one silly thing, because it really was an astounding coincidence. After we'd been to Gainey, and we'd been talking with the winemaker there, his name was Kirby Anderson, and I went and had a quiet word with the producer. We thought, he's great, he's going to be good on camera, people will like him, he doesn't take it too seriously, but he's very well informed. Yeah, we'll use him. And then as we were leaving, he came over and he said, do you recognize me? And I said, well, his face was vaguely familiar, but when you get to my age, you've either met everybody or they look like people you've met. So I said to him, well, I wondered he said, well, this may surprise you, but I was the producer's assistant for 5 years when we were making Fish Called Wanda together. Good. All right, we'll have a couple of those. I think we managed to. Now, red, rack of lamb.
I personally would probably go with something of a Syrah base, something that'll stand up to the meat but not overpower it.
Okay, but trouble is, I'm not a great Syrah fan, and I don't think I've got much. Any chance of a Pinot Noir?
Absolutely.
Let me tell you about one of the mistakes I've been making for years. I hope that you could avoid it. I've been much too hasty in making judgments about the kind of wine, especially the kind of grape that I like. I'll give you an example. I used to think I didn't like Viognier at all. Well, about 3 years ago, it was my birthday. I was in a very good mood. I was in San Francisco, and my daughter, who had won the under-19 horse jumping championships of California. And of course, she went off with her friends to celebrate, and I went to this very nice restaurant. And I knew the sommelier there, and he said, let me give you a glass of Viognier. And I said, yeah, I don't like Viognier. He said, just taste this. And I tasted it. Of course, it was delicious. I don't know what was wrong with the other Viognier, but anyway, I discovered I liked some Viognier. The same thing happened recently with a Rhone grape called Marsanne. I thought I didn't like Marsanne. It seemed to be rather dull. So I went to Patrick's Sidewalk Cafe in Santa Ynez, and he gives me a glass, and it's fabulous. So, and the same thing happened with Syrah during the making of this program. I'm not a great fan of Syrah normally. I quite like the first taste, but then to me, it just stays the same. It's kind of doesn't move, it doesn't change, it's not very interesting. I met a lovely lady when we were up at the Santa Maria Cooperative, where we shot those scenes of me surrounded by the huge crates of wine. And this lady was called Lane Tanner, and I told her about Syrah, and she said, well, try a bottle of mine. Because it was fabulous. It had all the qualities that, for me, Syrah doesn't ordinarily have. So at the start, if you're a beginner, like I have been until I made this program, maybe it's safer to stick with stuff that you're pretty sure that you like. But experiment now and again, because you may discover that there's this whole new world of some grape that you thought you didn't like that you can now start to enjoy. One of the things we try to do in this program is find lots of words that are useful for us when we want to describe to someone the kind of wine that we like. Now, this had a completely surprise effect on me, because I started to concentrate a little bit more and think, well, how would I describe this wine? In a funny kind of way, I got more interested in the taste. By that I mean that up to then it was quite simple. I either liked the taste or I didn't like the taste, and there was an end of it. But now I've discovered that when I taste something, even if it's something I don't think, ooh, that's great, I love it, then I kind of think, well, all right, that's not fabulous for me, but what are the tastes in there? What is it about this wine that don't like so much? Is there a taste in there that I do like? And so by getting almost an intellectual curiosity in the taste of the wine, it's given me an added dimension of enjoyment. And it also, if I'm out with friends and they choose a wine I don't particularly like, well, it makes it all a little bit more interesting than just thinking, don't like this much. The producer of this program, David Kennard, and I were chatting, and we thought to ourselves, why is it we enjoy being about these winemakers so much? And just spending time with them is a very good experience. And of course, it's partly that they really do love what they're doing. I mean, their great passion is to make a wine that's going to knock your socks off. But David and I decided it was more than that. It's to do with the fact that the winemakers are so connected with the place where they're working. They're connected with the soil, with the ground, with the whole terroir of the place, the whole atmosphere. And I just had this feeling it's very healthy for us to be connected to the place that we work in this way, instead of, well, I don't know, living the kind of life that I do, spending all my time in hotels and aeroplanes. The places where I spend most of my time, which is London and sometimes New York and the West Coast, are places where a lot of people drink wine as an everyday occurrence. It's the drink of choice. But of course, in a lot of America, it's not like that at all. It's more like my life was, growing up in this tiny little seaside resort on the west coast of England called Weston-super-Mare in about 1948, you know, when at Christmas we used to have the Christmas chicken. We didn't even have a turkey in those days, and out would come the bottle of fairly sweet white wine. I think my mother used to like Sauterne. And then we'd have this bottle of wine, and then we'd wait another 365 days, and then we'd have another. And it's surprising to me that so many people have that, oh, this is only for celebration attitude to wine, when you can get such great wine at such decent prices. I really hope that the wine drinking habit spreads, because not only is it tasting absolutely delicious, I have to say I think it's quite a lot healthier than most of the competing varieties of alcohol. Tell me why you guys here at Gainey have always been kind of interested in Riesling and making it when it became a bit unfashionable, right?
It did become unfashionable, but it was fashionable first.
Yeah?
That's when we planted the grape, was when it was fashionable. It fell out of favor.
Why?
Because Chardonnay.
Ah.
Chardonnay took over everything. That's all.
Nobody wanted to know about anything
Except Chardonnay.
And then it started to come back in?
Just recently. It's been rediscovered as quite a noble wine that it is. It goes with wonderful Pacific Rim cuisine, which we eat a lot more of than we used to.
All right.
It's a delicate wine, whereas lots of Chardonnays are big and powerful, so
Right.
it's a little bit more versatile.
Uh-huh. So when you guys at Gainey stuck with the Riesling grape, why did you stick with it?
Because of our venue here, we have lots of visitors, some of which are aficionados, some are not. Some like wine, some don't. Some tag along with friends who don't. And so if we have a wine that's slightly sweet, we can appeal to a larger audience. So this is a wine that we can offer to the non-sophisticated person who's just starting to get interested in wine, a taste of what wine can be. And so it's a little bit sweet, makes it a little easier to
So a
drink.
little bit, when I was young, the first wines that I really could enjoy were these, when I couldn't stand any reds at all.
It's like, it's your first wine, in a sense. It's easy to like this wine, right?
Right. It's a bridge for people to get into serious wine.
Absolutely.
But that makes it sound a little unsophisticated, whereas the Queen and I rather like slightly sweet wine. So that's acceptable, even in the sophisticated, isn't it?
Well, yes. The great country of Germany and the Alsace region of France produce marvelous Riesling wine. Most of it, well, a lot of it is very dry. Some of it's very sweet. But it's been in the aficionado's mindset for centuries, that Riesling makes wonderful wine.
So they make some dry and some sweet, like the Alsace wines. I know are dry. But what I don't understand is I think of Riesling as being a sweet wine grape. So how is it possible that from the same grape you can make it fairly sweet or very slightly sweet, like this one, which is sensational, or dry?
Well, the way to get a sweet Riesling is to stop the fermentation before it finishes. To get a dry Riesling, you let the fermentation finish.
So what is in there is grape juice.
Grape juice.
And yeast.
Yeast.
And that's it.
That's it.
All right, now where does the yeast come from? Because somebody told me that on the outside of the grape there is some yeast. So is that enough?
There is yeast on the outside. There's yeast everywhere. Because of the way I make Riesling, I need a strong yeast. And the yeast that's out in the environment is not very strong. So I actually buy commercial yeast and add it. I'm fermenting at a very cold temperature.
All right.
So
now explain to me what you were saying about the amount of fermentation determining how much sugar there is in the wine.
right. So we bring the grapes in, we press the grapes, we separate the juice from the skins and the seeds, we put them in the tank, then we add yeast to the tank, and I will go around and make a determination near the end of fermentation about whether this particular Riesling is going to be in an off-dry style or this Riesling is going to go all the way to dryness. If I want the fermentation to stop, I will turn the temperature way down and deactivate the yeast
So you stop the fermentation.
through temperature manipulation.
All right, now tell me one other thing. There's not a very high level of alcohol in Riesling.
No, no. One of the phenomenons of the Riesling grape is that it matures at a lower sugar. So it comes into the winery already with less sugar.
So the fact that there's less sugar in the Riesling grape means that it's a less alcoholic wine,
Yeah.
and that's why it's so light?
Right. It's a pure wine. There's no influences from any other factors except the grape. It has a lower alcohol. It has a nice high acidity. It does make the wine lighter, absolutely. And you can drink more of it.
Aha! Very important.
It's the fruitiness that people really enjoy. They can relate to the pineapple, to the flavors that they're sensing here, but they perceive that as sweetness. So even though it's truly a dry wine, their perception is sugar.
Oh, so because it's fruity, people think it's sweet, and that's kind of helping to balance the acidity.
Exactly.
Well, does the alcohol come into that?
Yes, it's the California phenomenon again. We have lots of warm, dry days. We produce lots of sugar in the grape, so the juice comes in with lots of sugar. We produce more alcohol, and alcohol at the right level will contribute the perception of being sweet. It can act as a counterbalance to a tart wine.
Oh, and in California, you have a higher degree of alcohol than they would, for example, in France?
In many cases, because we have such great growing conditions. It's dry weather, lots of sunshine.
Yeah, because I prefer these wines to a lot of the French Sauvignon Blancs, which to me are more sour.
They can be sour sometimes.
Yeah, so there's a kind of scale of acidity. Nobody likes sourness, but there's a kind of scale of acidity, and each person needs to find out kind of how acidic they like it.
Right.
And also, I think people that are just starting really don't like oak very much. And this is lacking oak, which is very positive for this wine. And so I think that's also why people enjoy this.
Very interesting. Now, tell me, are these good yet?
You tell me how they taste.
They're not.
Wonderful
They're about
flavor.
21 bricks.
I was going to say they're not very sweet. And brick is the way you measure the
Sugar
sweet,
content.
the sugar content in the grape.
So they got a ways to go.
So how far, if they're 21 now, where do you want to get them?
We like to target 25.
25, all right.
You can target. We can say we'll target 25 sugar, But if the flavor's not there in a year, we may have to go higher than that till the flavors are there. We only check chemistry for a while,
Yeah, I see.
and then we go for taste.
So it's not just about building up the sugar, it's also you're building up the flavor.
Flavors, right.
Well, now tell me what the tastes are, what the words you like to use when you're describing the taste of Merlot. Well, can I ask what year is this one?
This is our 2000 Carhartt Vineyard,
Right.
Merlot.
And what word? How would you describe this?
In the Merlot from Mike's, you get this really nice bittersweet chocolate, plum, kind of almost like plum cake and bittersweet chocolate. But I think, and it's a very sexy Merlot.
Mm. It's
Really
luscious,
sexy,
isn't it?
sexy.
You know, it's
luscious.
a Merlot with a middle. You know, and a lot of
Well,
times.
now, what do you mean a Merlot with a middle?
Well, a lot of times you drink Merlots, at least I find Merlots, you tend to have, you know, a little bit of upfront flavor, and then you sort of lose it in the mid palate, and then you have a little bit of tannin at the end, very soft tannin. This is a complete package. You get it all the way through the mouth.
And Merlot is basically, it's not it's a smoother wine, isn't it?
Yes.
Softer tannin.
It's softer. So that's connected with the tannins being low.
Yes, the berries are bigger than the other Bordeaux varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. So when you get a little bit bigger berry, you get a thinner skin, and so they're going to have less tannins.
Oh, I see. Thinner skin means less tannin. So
Right.
that makes it a smoother wine than, for
Right.
example, Cabernet
Smoother.
Sauvignon,
Yeah.
which
Yes.
we'll
Right.
talk about in a little bit. Smooth, plenty of fruit, plum, and then you say the chocolatey taste, which I can't get. You say that's
That's
at the end,
bittersweet
isn't it?
chocolate, not a sweet chocolate.
So what is this?
This
one?
is our 99 now. We're sort of
99,
proceeding
so-
backward, John, here. We're doing
All
the
right.
2000, and now we're working backward.
The first thing I notice is it's softer, isn't it? The 99 softer than 2000. Is that because it was kind of a different wine that year? Or is it because it's been in the bottle longer?
The
and is aging?
99 vintage ended in a warm note. The 2000 vintage ended in a cool note.
So
our
you're
acidity,
talking about the weather,
our,
right?
our acidities are more elevated in the 2000 wines than in the 99 wines. So you're getting more plushness on the palate from the 99.
So it was warmer in 99,
It was warmer at the-
less acidic, and
Yes.
therefore softer on
Yes.
the palate.
I think the 2000 will be a wine that'll be better with age.
I see, because the acidity needs to
Right.
work. So this wine is softer because it was warmer this year, and there's less acidity in it, but also because it's had an extra year of aging in the bottle. So what's the effect of aging?
Normally, the effect of aging is your acid starts to diminish slightly as the wine ages. And it softens and becomes a smoother, more complete package. Normally, that's what you look for in aging.
And does it have any more effect on the flavor?
Certainly you start losing the purity of the fruit into more bottle-aged aromatics and flavors.
All right. Well, let's talk a little about the fruity tastes and the other words that are useful to describe what sort of Cabernet Sauvignon you like.
Certainly cherry and,
Cherry.
And darker berries,
Darker
blackberries.
Now, these are the words that I see on descriptions, you know, in wine stores. I see things like tobacco and leather and all that. Tell me about some of those.
certainly we get characteristically tobacco here, and I think it's when my dad smoked a pipe, he smoked plum cake tobacco, and I always get that in Cabernet, plum cake. It's a sweet plum tobacco.
Oh, I see. It's almost more the smell
Yes.
of a nice, rich, slightly sweet pipe tobacco. Well, that helps me. I'll see if I can...
They also, you get that cigar box quality, not just from the fruit, but from the integration of the wood from the barrel and the fruit.
All right, what about leather? That's a word that crops up. Do you find that useful?
Definitely. It's the same idea as sort of barnyardy in a Pinot Noir. The leather in a Cabernet, usually when you leave a bottle open a little longer, a younger bottle like this, leave it open a little longer, and it starts emanating a lot of these other more intricate little flavors like leather and chocolate and
This has a really
tobacco.
nice cherry quality to it.
I'm trying to understand structure, though. Does that mean the sort of complexity in the sense that there's lots of different tastes, or is it about texture or what?
It's strictly textural.
Oh.
It can go anywhere from dusty and chalky to hard and bricky.
I see. So the people who like tannins, unlike myself, love the fact that this texture is created as the tannin develops in the bottle.
It can actually be thick or thin.
But it's not primarily to do with taste. It's a texture thing.
It's a textural.
Exactly.
All right.
But it has to do with taste when it comes to liking it. You know, I mean, some people like your softer tannin, some people like the harder tannin.
Now, what I read is that because great wines have tannin, that means that they age in the bottle, which is why they're great wine. What's the advantage of aging?
Well, John, it's just become a thing to be known in wines. In France, you know, you're drinking these 50, 60, 70-year-old Cabernets, and it's the romance of making a wine. But, you know, that isn't always the case, because nowadays, you know, people are drinking younger wines. People aren't waiting. They don't have the patience to wait for an older wine.
Stylistically, I think winemakers are managing tannins to the point where the wines are much softer upon release and eminently drinkable upon release.
So too high a level of tannin is simply does not make a nice taste. And that there's two things to do. One is to put it in the bottle and wait a long time, and the other is in the winemaking process. You can get rid of some of
Yes,
that.
there are good tannins and bad tannins. What you want is good tannins that don't over-envelop the fruit.
So the bad tannins envelop or sort of stifle the fruit.
They mask the fruit.
And what are the good tannins?
The good tannins meld with the fruit and give you that, don't push the fruit out of the wine, but add a textural quality to that fruit.
All right. Well, that's really clear for me. Thank you. But aren't there some people out there who are going to say, you know, you mustn't undervalue the great wines that have been aged over 60, 70, 80 years? I mean, do they have something that you cannot really get to in a young wine?
Those were wines made then, and I think the wines made now are wines made now.
I see. You mean that the techniques of making wine have got really a lot better?
Yes. The techniques have gotten better, and I think the whole focus point of the wine drinking market has gotten a little different. As I said before, people are not aging wines like they used to, at least not the great number of people that are drinking wine. They're buying a wine at their store, going home and drinking it that night. And so I think winemakers are starting to make wines that are a little more approachable, a little more balanced initially right out of the chute.
Now, I'm so excited about living in this area because the Central Coast is exploding according to all the wine magazines, and even more excited to know now that we can start to make great Cabernet Sauvignon.
Excellent.
This is our Sierra Madre vineyard, 2000 vintage. And what I think I'd like you to do is just take a sip of this first before I give you some of my thoughts, because I'd be interested in maybe some first comments you might have.
The fruity taste is not up the sharp end, the citrusy end. It's more, to me, down the, I think they call the mango end. It's more sort of a tropical.
Right, excellent.
It's very rounded. It's very soft, yeah?
It is very soft, but also I would, in my mind, I think there's a very nice natural acidity because this is a very cold growing region. And the cooler the region, you tend to have higher acidity in wines.
Right.
So they have a brightness and a vivid feel to them when they finish. And that's partly because of the acidity. But it's here we're just drinking these wines without food. But this wine with food, it has the natural acidity that can really help balance out the food. It really does go extremely well with food. Now here, because it's a cold region, our acids are very high. We have to go through full malolactic just so we can bring the acid down so we're in that range of the appropriate acidity for the wine. If we didn't go through malolactic, it would just be, that.
Really? So you use the secondary fermentation on everything?
Yes, on all the Chardonnays, yes, on all the wines we make.
And that's because it's cold out here, and
Well, it's
therefore
very-
it's high on
That's
acid.
right. You know, we're fortunate in that it's a cold region that we can soften the wine, the acidity, but bring the acid from being too high into its right range. But by doing so, also to complex the wine.
Yeah.
So you get the best of both worlds on that.
Right. Now, because when you talked about all the different components, a more complex wine has got more components, more tastes in it. Do you taste them all the same time? Because I kind of taste them one and then another and then another and then another.
I think that's happening. The wine, as we put it into our mouth, there's a first impression.
Yeah.
We swallow it. We talk about, the front end, the middle part, and the finish.
And sometimes you get a very simple, good, quite cheap wine, and it's absolutely fine, and you rather like it. But you don't
It doesn't
need,
demand your time and
yeah,
attention.
you don't have to think what's going on or anything. But whereas these, the great delight is that it is changing all the time, which kind of makes it more interesting.
Oh, it does. It draws you right into it.
Yeah.
What we have in mind is when we're making a wine is to put the ingredients not together now when we're getting ready to bottle the wine, but trying to visualize how this wine will be in time.
You see, that's what's extraordinary about what you do. I mean, I can see great painting, but the paintings that completely blow me away are the ones that don't begin to come to life until you stand back a few feet from it. You think, how can the painter standing here have known what it was going to be like? And you're like that. You're making something, guessing, maybe even having a real hunch about what it's going to taste like in 5 or 6 years.
That's the beauty of wine. It's a great product to work with because it's so expressive. And as a winemaker, you have a lot of responsibility to try to capitalize on what Mother Nature gave us in the vineyard and see what you can do to make the most of it. And that's what we try to do. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Glad you enjoyed our little journey into Chardonnay.
So what makes the Pinot Noir the lightest of the great reds? Is that lower alcohol?
No, it's actually the skin on the grape is a little bit thinner on Pinot Noir, where Cabernet or Syrah actually has a thicker skin, so there's more color, more aromatics, and more flavor in it. So Pinot Noir just has a very thin skin.
Well, I know you're famous for your Pinot Noir, so let's go around.
Well, we have a couple. These are brand new. Now, this is our Sierra Madre vineyard, so these are going to be very young wines and going to be a little bit different than you'd be used to tasting one that's been aged in the bottle. Let's take a sip and see what we have.
And I know that this thing you're using is called a wine
thief. Yes,
Isn't
it
that
is.
a lovely name?
Okay, there
Thank
you
you.
go.
There's another.
Okay. Like you can see that even though we're saying this is Pinot Noir, we still have a pretty deep color, but it's not black, but it's a very deep garnet, dark garnet type of color. Okay, so in a young wine, it's going to be very fresh and fruity, still have some yeast smells on it, that type of thing.
All right, but it's beautifully fruity.
Now remember we talked about malolactic earlier? Well, this wine has actually started going through that malolactic process. So we're going to soften those acids and we're going to add more character and complexity to the wine by doing that. So these wines have also been inoculated with that, and that's part of what you're smelling. Is it's a little bit, I'm going to say it's a little bit bacterial, but it's going to make the wine better, trust me. Okay?
Okay, I believe it.
Okay. So this, to me, I would describe this as kind of a dark, fresh cherry. It's almost like biting into almost like a sour Bing cherry.
Yes,
type of thing.
it is a little bit sour, and it's very dry because the smell is very fruity, and then the taste is much less fruity.
Okay,
right?
and the reason for that, when you say what you're saying about dry, that's really the sensation that you're feeling on the palate. And that's coming from, one, the wine has quite a bit of acidity still, because the malolactic hasn't softened that acid, which it will. But it also, the malolactic is going to add that richer dimension we were talking about, butteriness.
Yes.
It'll add that feel. So the acid is lowered, and then we add more mid-palate body richness to the wine. So this will be, in 4 or 5 months, a totally different wine. But it's just being born now. And the components of the oak barrel, I mean, it's important to have all of our wines are aged in French oak. And we were talking about it's easy to over oak a wine, and that's not good, which then you lost a lot of the purpose. But oak, you can under oak a wine too, and that's just as unfortunate because you lose some of the possibility for the wine to be as most expressive as it can. Oak is in a wine for a reason.
So if you don't have enough oak, what is it? It's just too fruity and not interesting?
Okay, it would be like how that one bay leaf in the stew makes the stew much more complex.
Right.
That's kind of the idea here. You don't want 27 bay leaves in your stew. You want one or two. And that's what the barrel is doing. It's giving you that additional complexity. But it is somehow through generations we associate oak with wine. That is a question, or whether it is really better. And I think that's probably the second is the answer. It just works well. It helps really evolve the wine and pick it up and give it more meaning.
Very good. So oaks, the fruits, anything else that's characteristic of this great wine?
Now then we talked about these earth tones,
Yeah,
and that's
forgot
part of the Pinot Noir expression, where we're just not dealing with the singular fruit and oak.
All right.
There's really much more going on in Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, as far as wines, in my mind, is the most expressive of any wine. It can take, if we look, up in a vineyard, you can say, okay, this row of Pinot Noir, you could pick that row, make wine separate, and the rootstock or the clone might be different than the row right next to it. So you would say, okay, I can understand why that wine would be different. But you can also take that same combination of rootstock and clone, and maybe it's 100 feet to 200 feet apart. The wine could be different, and the only difference was that distance because of just slightly different aspect, tilt, the density of the soil structure, that type of thing.
But that makes a difficult job even more difficult.
It does. I call it job security, but Pinot Noir is so expressive, and that's one of the beauties of it. But that's why it takes time to understand it in the from a vineyard standpoint and in the winery. It took us 10 years of experimentation in the vineyard to try to figure out which combination of these rootstocks and clones were the best to optimize this site. But when you get a glass and you can finally say, this is right, it's like, oh yeah, oh yeah. This is tough to make. And when it's right, it's right. So glad you enjoyed it with us.
God bless.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
These are Brendan's vino ruminations. Number one, don't usually prefer whites. Today is warm. This tasted of apples, would expect it to be very expensive. It was a white.
So
I found it.
Was that your favorite?
I don't know yet. I mean, it was perfumey. I like the smell of it. Number two, it says I preferred number one, but found it somewhere between mulch and mouthwash.
All right. Okay.
I don't know if
that was the one I liked.
Really?
Yes.
Because it was earth and cleansing at the same time. Number that was a white also.
All right,
number
number
three, smell good, taste bad.
Tastes bad. That's important.
AKA high C fruit punch, which I like. Number four, put it back in the horse. One for the cuspidor. I couldn't see daylight through it. And if you look closely at my notes, it actually splattered the page.
Oh, yes, it did. So 4 is not a favorite.
No.
All right.
Number 5, dry, sexy.
Yes, good red.
Legs like dripping wax.
So you like that?
I like number 5.
All right.
Number 6, I found cloying and probably excellent for hypoglycemics.
Yeah. So, favorite?
Favorite would have to be
105.
1.
1. All right.
1. I don't know if it's because it was the first one I tasted.
Well, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter,
I'm
but
just
I
saying,
mean,
which did you like?
I go with number 1.
All right. And then, which of the ones you hated was the worst?
The one that put it back in the horse one would have been number 4.
Number 4.
Didn't prefer number 4.
Thank you.
All right.